Welcome to the Family Beacon podcast from Minnesota Family Council with hosts Grace Evans and Moses Brattrud. Stay informed on the top stories on life, family, and religious freedom. Get the facts, stand for truth. Hello and welcome back to the Family Beacon podcast. My name is Grace Evans. I'm here with Moses Brattrud. Today we are going to be giving you a 2022 Minnesota election recap, which I'm sure many of you really want, really need. Honestly, I still am very confused on how some of the things went down, so I'm really looking forward to Moses giving us a rundown on that because he really is the election expert here in the office, one of them. We have a few, but he is awesome. He knows how to break it down.
I do try to keep track of this stuff.
He called me yesterday and gave me a nice little rundown, which was really helpful. And so we'll also be talking about this honestly quite crazy story from the gender health program at Minnesota's Children's Hospital.
Oh my goodness.
The director of that program, which is basically like a transgender program, came out and said some pretty wicked and just anti-science and anti-truth stuff. So we'll be discussing what she has to say about mutilating children's bodies. But first, let's jump into the election results. So Moses, tell us first about what happened on the state level.
Yeah, so, unfortunately, Grace, as you know, we did not get the results that we wanted. We wanted to see a pro-life governor. We wanted to see a pro-life attorney general. We wanted to see pro-life control of the Minnesota House and the Minnesota Senate. And unfortunately, that did not happen. Scott Jensen lost to Tim Walz. Jim Schultz lost to Keith Ellison. And then at the state level, at the legislative level, it looks like there's going to be a narrow one-seat pro-abortion majority in the Minnesota Senate, which is bad because for the last, I think, 6 years.
Since 2018, I'm pretty sure, right?
Yeah. I don't know precisely when Republicans took back the Minnesota Senate. I think that might have been where they switched from Senate and House. At any rate, it's been a while since the Democrats have controlled both chambers.
And I think the Star Tribune tweeted out or put on their a blog post and one of their articles that the Democrats now have more control over the state than since 2014 because they now control
That's right.
all
branches. They have
what's
called a trifecta. They control the House, the Senate, and the governor's mansion. Those are the three co-equal branches of our government.
Yeah, I think we should talk about really quickly how we're not trying to make this a partisan thing of look, the Democrats are in control, guys, buckle up. But in a sense, that is the case, not because they're Democrats, but rather because of what many of these candidates support.
Unfortunately, Jenks, padlock, no backs. Yeah,
he owes me a Coke.
There used to be a lot more fluidity among the parties over the issue of abortion, but actually there were two pro-life Democrats who lost their bids for re-election, including DFL Representative Julie Sandstead from Hibbing, I think.
Yep, Hibbing.
And so that's sad. It's sad on one level. The person who replaced her, I believe, is a pro-life Republican, so that's good. But yeah, this isn't about parties. It's about principles. But we will sometimes talk about Democrats and Republicans as a shorthand for the pro-life and pro-abortion caucuses in these legislative bodies because more or less that's the party leadership is guaranteed to be on the right, they're guaranteed to be at least somewhat pro-life, and on the left to be somewhat pro-abortion. And then, the way it works at the legislature is that you have to vote with your party, or you have to have a good reason why on very serious issues. And there's a difference between votes that are whipped. Okay, I'm sorry, I'm getting into the weeds here. Very briefly, there's a difference between votes that are whipped, which it means when the party leadership really, really wants you to vote that way, versus votes that are where members of the bodies are totally free to make up their own mind. If it's about changing the state bird of Minnesota or something. Abortion is not in that category. Okay, so yeah, a couple bright spots that I want to talk about are the candidates that we endorsed for election or re-election in Minnesota who won. So we want to send big congratulations to
these pro-life, pro-family now nominees.
Yeah, pro-life champions. Senator Jim Abler, Senator Julia Coleman, Senator-elect Brad Leaskey. So that's on the Senate side, and then on the House side we have looks like Representative elect Natalie Lesnikar. She's within 25 votes, so we'll see if that.
Wow, that is so tight. See, never let anyone tell you that your vote does not matter.
Right.
25 votes, and there's been even slimmer margins too.
Absolutely, and it looks like she won. She won over somebody who's been in office since 1976.
Wow.
So if that there's an automatic recount when the margin is that tight, but if that holds, then that's a pickup, and we endorsed Natalie Lesnikar. We endorsed Jeff Dotseth, who won, Pam Altendorf, Patricia Mueller, Representative Mueller, and Representative Patty Anderson. So we're excited to see what those people, and we didn't endorse every pro-life champion. We only endorsed folks in generally in relatively tight swing districts. So to see so many of these
where we knew that our voice and our endorsement would make a really big difference.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So we're really excited for those folks and all the other pro-life, pro-family champions who will be inaugurated or re-inaugurated.
Yeah.
Sworn in.
They're really going to be on the front
Paul.
lines, honestly, with this next session.
Yeah. So that's generally the result at the state level.
Yeah. Let's talk about, before we talk more about the federal level, let's also talk briefly about what will MFC's work look like now that we have this trifecta of sorts. Let's give the audience basically, of course we can't give them our entire game plan, but how are we going to continue to work to promote our values, even though it looks pretty grim?
Yeah. The good thing is that we've been in this situation before. We're used to being the folks in the room who are speaking up for Christian and conservative Minnesotans, even when the odds are against us. And we've actually, I was talking about this with John Halberger, our boss, who has been in charge of this organization for a long time, and he's been in this situation many times. And essentially, every time our organization has been in that situation, God has blessed our efforts in really surprising ways. And so we're hopeful that we'll continue to be able to be the voice for pro-life, pro-family Minnesotans, and that we will even notch up wins, whether that's getting bipartisan bills passed or stopping bad bills that look like they had a great chance of passing. We've already talked about some bills that we have a good chance of stopping behind closed doors. So we'll see we'll see what actually shapes up when the legislative session meets in January.
Yeah, I think it's really important for you guys just to recognize is that our job in a more favorable situation with the legislature is to be faithful. And our job with a less favorable situation is to be faithful.
Absolutely.
And so as Christians, whether you're super active in politics or not, your job is to be faithful, and God really blesses faithfulness. And it can seem like, wow, like this, we were promised a red wave, or we were told a red wave was going to happen, so to speak, or a pro-life wave was going to come. And yeah, we hoped for that. We prayed for that pro-life wave. But just because it didn't happen this year doesn't mean that God isn't working. In fact, I know that he's working. And it just means that our work honestly becomes even more important.
Yeah.
And so we just need to continue to rise up to be faithful and see what God does over the next few months and few years here in Minnesota.
Absolutely.
So let's briefly talk about what happened on the national level, because I'm sure we'll talk about Florida, what happened there. Pretty crazy stuff. I did not expect it to be from Florida to go from like purplish to bright red, but it basically did. Let's talk nationwide. Yeah,
I mean, probably one of the best things that happened for conservatives this election was what happened in Florida. Governor Ron DeSantis won re-election by close to 20 points, which is nuts.
It's crazy. Yeah. And didn't he sign, what pro-life bill did he sign? I can't remember if it was a heartbeat bill.
He signed a 15-week ban.
Yeah.
Yep. And I'm going to talk a little bit about governors who signed pro-life legislation who were reelected.
Yeah, kind of
in fact,
why don't
I do that right now?
Yeah, go ahead.
Here's the numbers. In terms of folks who were elected, Ron DeSantis signed what he actually signed was a pain-capable abortion ban. He won by almost 20%. Governor Mike DeWine of Ohio signed a heartbeat ban. He won by 25%. Governor
25%.
Brian Kemp, 25%. Governor Brian Kemp of Georgia signed a heartbeat ban. He won by 7.5%. Governor Greg Abbott of Texas signed a heartbeat ban and a trigger law with complete protections, and he won by 11%. So what we're definitely not seeing is like this pro-life wasteland where no pro-life candidates are winning and like that issue is just losing all across the board. We're definitely we don't want to sugarcoat it though, because as I'm talking about these wins, we should also talk about the losses. Unfortunately, there were at least 4, actually I think 5 bad abortion amendments on the ballot.
Yeah, Michigan, California, and then was Kentucky one of them too?
Michigan, California, and Vermont all passed
so
really bad pro-abortion constitutional amendments, and then 2 pro-life amendments that I'm aware of in Montana and Kentucky both failed.
And the Montana one, I have to say something about this. It was so depressing because the Montana one, their amendment was purely it wasn't very radical at all. It was very moderate. It would have required that medical attention be given to children that survive botched abortions.
Yeah.
So a baby is born, and then that baby is required to receive medical care, and like doctors need to act in the best interest of the child. No. The majority of Montana, by a slim majority, they voted against that life-saving measure.
And it's sort of like,
wow.
Do I think that reflects the considered opinion of the people of Montana?
No.
Not for 1 second.
We should talk about that. Did you see that tweet by Lila Rose?
No, I didn't.
Okay, so she tweeted out, she has a good take on this. She's a very prominent pro-life activist. She said, this, like, unfortunate turn of events, like what happened in Michigan, basically, they codified the right, quote unquote, to abortion in their constitution. So it's similar to what we have here, Doe v. Gomez. They just basically have their own
Well, it's
or is it different?
It's different because they actually added that to their constitution.
Okay, so it's a little bit worse.
So we don't have that in our constitution.
It's a little bit worse there.
The court has said that we do.
Okay,
it's worse in Michigan.
Okay, it's worse in Michigan. Basically, we're seeing all of these losses. And so Lila Rose is a pro-life activist. She's usually pretty optimistic like I am, like Moses and I tend to be. Not like falsely optimistic in that we shouldn't be, but this was her take, and I thought it was really good. She said, like, we suffered some tremendous losses. However, I don't think that we should take these losses as representative of the American people, like what you were saying, because we were outspent so much by pro-abortion messaging. Like they spent, I think over $3 million or $3 billion. I think over $3 million
in Montana
in Montana on pro-abortion messaging, and then the pro-life side spent way less.
I have another number on that.
Yeah.
So this is just one measurement, but according to one measurement in terms of digital spending, pro-life messaging since the beginning of the year was outspent 14-1.
Yes, crazy.
Which is just insane. And so when you have that level of, and I think we've talked in the podcast about all the political mailers we got saying that, and the political ads we all saw this election cycle saying that Scott Jensen is a dangerous radical who will do X, Y, and Z. And like that takes money. And unfortunately, this cycle, the pro-life side did not. The pro-life, as far as we can tell, turnout among pro-life people was pretty good, and that's why we saw pro-life wins, especially in states like Florida, as we've discussed.
But then we saw my generation vote.
Yeah.
And boy, does my generation vote, apparently.
Yeah, so in terms of the age split, where it's funny because we did not take notes on this, but we are talking about the same things. And
really?
Wow. I was gonna talk about demographics.
Wow.
So when we look at, let's talk about, there's clearly like a pro-abortion demographic in this country.
And guess what? It's almost all of Gen Z is that way.
Yeah.
Unfortunately.
So 63% of people under 29, which would essentially be the youngest millennials and the Gen Z people who can vote. And then 59% of unmarried people, 68% of unmarried women
are pro-abortion. Is that what you're saying?
They voted for Democrats.
Okay,
so we can't say with certainty that they're pro-abortion, but they are willing to vote that way. And then also 55% of childless women. So that's the demographic. It's people who are young, women, it's people who are childless. Those are the people who are voting for abortion. And, it's kind of sad to acknowledge this, but of course, those are the people, single, young women, who are most likely to have an abortion. And that's a big part of our electorate. The United States is still a relatively young country.
Oh, definitely.
And so the fact that young women, unfortunately, have been sold a bill of goods. They've been told that they need abortion. They've been told that what's in the womb is just tissue, as Grace has discussed so many times. So they have bought these lies, and they're voting accordingly. And they're getting these lies through this incredibly well-oiled fundraising operation in Minnesota and across the country.
And that's why it's so important that we pour money into exactly what we're doing. We have this series, what is it called? Women Share abortion regret.
Abortion regret. Yeah,
abortion
just stories
regret.
of abortion regret.
Stories of abortion regret. Like we've had people actually donate to this cause. We spent a lot of money on this, on getting stories out of women who've actually undergone abortions so they can share their testimony with Minnesotans, because really ads are powerful. And if the majority, 35-1 is of the ads that someone sees, if you're seeing so many more pro-abortion ads than pro-life ads and you're personally don't really know what to think, you're just going to go with the ads that you see more of, unfortunately, unless you do your own research. And so I think that's really telling what Lila was saying, is because the pro-life position is not a losing proposition, and I think it could be easy to assume that based on some of the election results, at least in Minnesota.
Yeah.
But I don't think that's true. I think that actually we see that it's a winning proposition, the pro-life side is, when you boldly state your position and you take the pro-life case without exception. Because I think that we saw a lot of losses when there were, I would say, flaky candidates across our nation, some in our state even, where they would say they were pro-life, but they weren't as pro-life as they could have been. And then we have someone like Ron DeSantis, who probably angered a ton of people by signing that pro-life legislation, and many other candidates, like I think Governor Kemp was one of them who signed a pro-life bill.
Yeah.
And they boldly, blatantly stated their position, and they highlighted, this is my opinion, Moses, I think maybe you disagree slightly, but they highlighted the pro-abortion extremism so well. They said, yeah, I am pro-life. And that candidate over there supports murder, baby murder, up until the moment of birth.
Yeah.
You vote on that, you choose. And I think that's when we win, is when we accept our position fully and we're like, this is what we're for, and that is what the other side is for.
I think you saw in Pennsylvania, the Senate race there, an example of that. So John Fetterman, the Democrat who just won that election, he said he supports abortion up until the moment of birth, more or less in those words. And his opponent, the TV doctor, Mehmet Oz, he was not able to challenge him on that because he had already staked his own position as basically, well, I'm something quote unquote pro-life asterisk, but I'm not going to support any necessarily
personally
pro-life bills in Pennsylvania. And so he wasn't able to go in for the kill. He wasn't able to challenge his opponent as being a pro-abortion radical because he himself had staked such a weak sauce position on that issue. So
candidates win, pro-life candidates win, pro-family candidates win when they're not squishy about it. Yeah. When they're very bold, very strong, and they say we're going to go after these issues with everything we've got.
Yeah, now that's true, but that's only true when we're able to have some type of parity in terms of the ad spending, in terms of getting to the hearts and minds of people. Unfortunately, people are swayed by political ads.
Very true.
You know, it's like Dobbs is a big change. Some people are very scared about that, and we certainly saw some people voting in accord with that. Sad to say, but I think we definitely saw that. I think we've there's so much more to say. We've only talked about just one issue. Ultimately, the abortion issue was probably not one of the biggest issues for many voters, but it was for some for some voters. It is the biggest issue for us here, so that's why we're talking about that. So I think that's a good recap. We can't say definitively what's happened at the federal level because things have not been decided yet.
Right.
And we don't want to prognosticate too much either, but there are 3 Senate seats that are still up for grabs. Arizona, Nevada, and Georgia. Nevada, and so those first two are we'll get the results in the coming days, and then the Georgia race will be decided by a runoff on December 6th. So that will determine control of the U.S. Senate. I think Republicans have to win 2 of those 3 seats or something like that to gain control, to get 51 seats in the Senate. The Democrats only need 50 votes in the Senate, in theory, to have de facto control because Vice President Kamala Harris serves as the president of the Senate, and she can break ties. In the U.S. House, also, we do not know whether the Republicans will be able to take control. The augurs are pretty positive for Republicans being able to take control, but it will be narrower. And, we talked a little bit about the red wave. So I guess the last thing I'll say about the federal election
And are we saying red wave or are we saying pro-life wave? Because sometimes we need to specify which we're talking about now.
Well, right now I'm just talking about a red wave.
Red wave, okay.
So we thought many people were talking about a red wave.
I didn't really buy it, to be honest.
Yeah.
I didn't think we'd have a red wave. Well, I didn't think we'd have a red tsunami. I thought maybe we'd have some red ripples.
Yeah, well, and it's funny because we did in some parts of the country, and it's kind of odd to see like in Ohio, we had essentially a red wave. Governor DeWine wins by 25 percentage points. J.D. Vance wins Senate by almost 10 points, and he's a relatively controversial candidate and the Democrats spent a huge amount of money to try to beat him. Then in Michigan, which is right across the border, the Democrats swept the entire slate. Gretchen Whitmer, who we thought was going to be really unpopular because of COVID policies.
I was shocked.
Yeah, in a sense, that's really similar to what happened in Minnesota.
Same. I was very
Michigan
surprised
is similar.
that the race wasn't tighter between Walz and Jensen, Governor Walz, I should say, because I just thought his COVID policies were very unpopular. So I thought it would be very, very tight, but it wasn't.
No, it was not. We really thought it was going to be tighter, and the polling was indicating that it was tighter. The polling was indicating something like 4 or 5 points, and Walz was winning by something like 8 points.
Crazy.
And really, if we look at the map, it's because the rural areas of Minnesota are getting redder, and the suburban areas of Minnesota are getting bluer, unfortunately. And that, unfortunately, there's just more people. Like if you put the metro area, it's just... The metro area is 3.5 million people out of a total population of something like not even 6 million. Yeah. So that's more than half the population of the entire state right there. So anyhow, that's enough about this election. I think there'll be more to say in the coming weeks for sure. Ultimately, though, and I'll just point to one thing. We're really excited to see Senator Mark Johnson be appointed as the new Senate Minority Leader. Mark Johnson is a champion for life and for families, and so in the Minnesota Senate. So there's good things that are already coming out of this. Whenever there's a big shakeup, there's always positive and there's negative changes. So the negative changes are just the loss of that pro-life backstop in the Minnesota Senate, but strong leadership on life is still going to be there, and so we're excited to see that. But that's my last word on the Minnesota election.
Yeah, I just have one more thing to say. I would just say, and this kind of echoes what our CEO, John Helmberger, said recently in an email we sent out regarding the election. Just, praise the Lord that our final hope has never been in politics. Moses and I have never placed our final hope, our final confidence in pro-life candidates or in Republicans in general, and neither does our organization. And just imagine if we did, we would be crushed right now. But thankfully, you guys listening, us here, that is not where our hope is. We know that God is going to do amazing things, even if maybe the odds aren't in our favor politically. Actually, I think that a lot of leaders are born out of times like these, and I think that it will actually push a lot of people to run next season, running season. And so I think it's hard. The stakes are high, but our hope isn't in this world, which is a good reminder.
Right. We absolutely trust God's promises, that he will not let our foot slip, that he will bless our efforts, whatever that looks like here. And that ultimately, as Grace said, our hope is in Jesus' blood and his righteousness rather than in who wins, the R's and the D's. We don't ultimately put as much stake in that as our opponents do in the world. So, Grace, speaking about our opponents in the world, Children's Minnesota, it is one of the best children's hospitals. I've had it's of course not fun when you have to take your kid there, but I've had to twice, and both times they have been exceptional, and it's right down the road from me. It's an incredible hospital, and yet, and they do so much good to help kids. But what are they doing now that's hurting kids?
Yeah, so they basically have this new gender health program, relatively new. I think it's a few years old at this point. And you and I have been watching this for some time. I think we've commented on some things from this program at the hospital, but it really is hurting children. And I want to go ahead and roll a clip in a minute of the director of this program. She is talking about basically what she thinks about children deciding their gender. And this isn't the most condemning video clip that has gone out about her, but it's the most recent one, which is why I'm talking about it. And she's a 41-year-old parent of 3. She says that she's a parent. Well, actually, you'll just see in the video. Anyway, she's a 41-year-old parent, and shouldn't we
just say mom?
Sure, mom. I'm looking at an article.
She's sneaking in that.
Yeah, you're right. You're actually
term.
right. Thank you. Mother. And she actually owns 50 brightly colored bow ties. That's what she told someone who was interviewing her. So she wears those rainbow bow ties a lot. So, okay, I'm going to go ahead and roll that clip right now.
So let's start with how kids understand gender identity. Well, from the age of about 2, kids can understand gender differences. Now, this is mostly based on physical characteristics and anatomy as they sort and put people into categories, boys and girls, mommies and daddies. Kids at 2 are actually very good at putting things into categories, and they're very concrete and binary thinkers. So this is a fun and easy task for them. As they move into age 3 and 4, they then begin to figure out where they fit. They've seen the categories and they're turning the lens inward to discover where they fit in the categories that have been explained to them, most of which are boy and girl. Now, they often develop more sophisticated understanding of physical characteristics and anatomy around this time, and they're often not shy about sharing their discoveries with us. They may exclaim, "I'm a girl and I have a vagina." And that may happen in the pediatrician's office or in the checkout line at the grocery store. They have figured out their place in the world and they are claiming it. It shouldn't surprise you then that some transgender kids are also claiming their identities as young as 3 and 4 years old. They know the categories, they know how they should feel inside based on their anatomy, and they also know that the way that they see themselves doesn't line up with other people's expectations. From as young as some kids can talk, they're explaining to their parents the truth about their identities. And I have 3 boys, or rather I have 3 kids, 6, 6, and 4, who were assigned male at birth and continue to identify as boys. And when our kids were growing up, we tried to expand their gender categories just a little bit. So instead of saying to them, these are boy parts and these are girl parts, we taught them that most boys have penises and most girls have vaginas, just to leave open the possibility that biology isn't destiny, and that how someone feels inside or their gender identity may not line up with expectations based on anatomy.
Okay, wow. So you saw in that video clip that the mother is talking about from age 2, these kids can understand gender differences, which is generally true. Like, kids can generally understand that from that age. Yeah. And then she said from ages 3 to 4, they begin to figure out where they fit and they begin to turn that lens inward to themselves, which I think is probably generally true too. I'm not a doctor, but I feel like 3 to 4 is a pretty good age estimate. But then we get into some problems, because then she goes on to talk about how a lot of times kids begin to understand that the way that they see themselves don't line up with other people's expectations. Yeah. And the problem with that is, like, okay, perhaps sometimes that is the case with some young kids, not on a large scale. Perhaps that is the case. But our role as parents and as health providers is never to affirm that confusion. It's always to point them back to the truth, and to point them back to the truth that their body is actually perfect for them, and their body is exactly the kind of body that they were supposed to be born into, and there's no such thing as being born in a wrong body. Right. And so it really is, I'm not going to repeat the other stuff that she said just because it's very, jarring to hear. But basically, it's just the whole point about, I genuinely can't believe that she believes that kids from this young can decide they're transgender and that we should affirm them in that. Yeah. That's so young and very harmful to children. And so I did some digging onto Children's Minnesota, this specific program, onto their website. Mm-hmm. And basically it shows that they're proud to advertise that they offer puberty blockers, cross-sex hormone treatments to kids, and that these are actually linked to negative side effects, including infertility, brain swelling, vision loss, and even death. I'll have screenshots on the screen right now of studies.
So I'm sorry. You're saying that they're sharing this information?
Well, no, this is on their website. They offer puberty blockers and cross-sex hormones to kids. And I'm saying that these things cause...
I was going to say, wow, they're actually telling people that these side effects might occur?
I should have clarified. No, I'm just saying that they offer these things, and I'm telling you, and I'm putting screenshots up right now of different studies that have been done, different investigative journalism.
Right. This is not controversial that these drugs are very harmful.
Happen to kids, which is so bad. And the other terrible thing is on their website, they say that they provide compassionate and comprehensive care for transgender and gender diverse youth. Compassionate. It's just like the manipulation of language, even what you pointed out earlier of her referring to herself as a parent, and I just totally said parent because I saw that on her article. But it's so true. It's kind of like they're trying to erase gender in one sense, but then also argue that it's fluid, which that's the thing that's so confusing about this, is on the one hand they're trying to argue that the stereotypes are so true and that we have gender stereotypes, and so if you're a boy but you think you're a girl, you can become a girl and like switch into that stereotype basically. Like if you like dresses but you're a boy, that means you're a girl. But then on the other hand, it's also like they're trying to get rid of those gender stereotypes and boundaries because it's like a sign of the patriarchy. You can't have it both ways.
No, I don't think so.
I'm very confused by that. Anyways, so in the first 2 months of this program opening, they drew in 50 new patients into this program, ranging from 3 years old, Moses, to 18. And the program itself had anticipated serving about 90 kids over 1 year, but they've been averaging like 70 to 80 calls per month.
Oh, my goodness.
So that's incredibly more than what they had thought.
We talk about the transgender epidemic, like how even these people who are feeding this frenzy, they did not even like expect the level of demand that they're actually seeing because of what Abigail Schreier has pointed out, this insane contagion that's hurting kids. And you know what? The sad thing is that like you wonder how many parents who are scared their kids are saying I'm this. They're calling up this gender clinic, and I wonder what their percentage rate of saying, you know what, just watch and wait. Let's just try to love your son or daughter, and maybe treat some underlying issues that are going on, such as maybe like a body, some things like not being comfortable in their body, that type of thing, in terms of like with certain aspects of their body, that is to say, rather than with their gender, and like just watch and wait. Like I somehow imagine that's not the majority of their calls, but they're like, come on in, we'll have you talk to a gender counselor. We'll have you talk to a gender counselor, and we'll get you on a path of chemicals, a course of chemicals that will transform your body permanently and potentially leave you with a higher cancer risk, infertility, all the things that you've been talking about. And and as you say, it is a financial motive.
I think it would be good to see the stats for sure, but even if we don't know the stats, we know it's happening. And even if it's one kid, it's too many, right? So we're seeing, she said, the doctor, the mother, she said that we're just here to help families in their journey wherever they are. You can come in with a 4-year-old who wants to wear a dress and talk through conversations about gender. We don't have an agenda, is what she says. But then on the website, it talks about how transgender and gender diverse kids face unique health issues, including the possible need for pubertal, is how you say it? Pubertal, I think, suppression, hormone treatment, and fertility preservation. So then on their website, they're saying that kids often need these things. That's not true. That actually sounds like an agenda to me. Kids do not need those things. And then the other problem is that all of these, on their website, they say that families should consider the options of pausing or delaying sex development with suppression and medications. For example, doctors can help pause periods if menstruation is causing dysphoria or distress. So imagine doing that. Okay, number one, most of the time, if you're a girl, a biological girl, and you are you're uncomfortable with your own body, that's actually normal. That's pretty normal. When you're going through puberty, that's very normal. And saying the period is the problem, that's probably not the case.
I'm just going to press pause. It makes it sound so innocent rather than what it actually is, which is like a huge chemical intervention, which after a certain point is irreversible.
Mm-hmm. I saw this ad from, do you know who Jazz Jennings is?
Yes.
I think she was the first kid to publicly transition. Is that correct?
First that I'm aware of, certainly. Yeah.
I stumbled across her videos where she had this little documentary thing. Wait, is it he? Jazz is a he, I'm pretty sure.
Yeah.
Is a biological male, excuse me. He, years ago, when I was far younger, and I was shocked. I was so confused. I was like, what even is going on?
Yeah, he has a TV show. I don't know if it's still going. Kind of a sad story.
And then I think he wrote a book. But anyways, I just saw this ad from, I believe he lives in California now. He lives in one of the states where these drastic measures are being taken, and he's on camera and he's like, if I hadn't had access to the life-saving treatment that I did when I was a kid, then I would look something like this. And then it's a picture of a man grown up with regular man hair and everything, and then it switches back to him and he looks like a girl. And it's just wow, this kid was encouraged and coerced by the medical industry into paying lots of money and having his body mutilated. And that's so sad because I think right now there's no regret in his mind. He's so happy, but I think at some point that regret will come. And even if it doesn't, regret comes for the majority of people that do transition.
Yeah.
And so, it has implications on future parenthood, future fertility, future literally life.
I think that, not to get too graphic here, but I think the sad thing, especially regarding when you are interfering with the reproductive system, and the things that they try to do to make people feel comfortable, which I will not get any more explicit about than that, just what they call bottom surgery. Generally, those things, the body treats them as wounds, and they never truly heal. And so like it never really works out. Now of course, if they fix that, even if they were able to do it perfectly from a surgical perspective,
you're just covering up your gender. You're not changing your gender.
Right, you are. Every cell in your body is still going to shout, "This is who I am. I have either an XX chromosome or an XY." Those are the options, folks.
Is it Jordan B. Peterson? Probably other people have said this, but like if you die today and then in 50 years or 100 years you get dug up, like it's going to show if you're a biological male or a biological woman.
It's just like your skeleton. It's going to have. That's not a very good Jordan Peterson impression. But if I and then started crying a little bit.
But cites a Bible verse even though he's not a Christian. Oop.
Not yet.
Not yet.
We'll see what happens.
But yeah, so that's happening here in Minnesota, guys. And so it is. I don't want to be too optimistic because we lost some very crucial pro-life seats and some pro-life ground and pro-family ground here in this election. And there are people in Minnesota that support exactly what I've just been talking about. And this is already happening in our state. And I really don't want to go the route of California where children could be taken away from parents. We don't have that like on the ballot right now. I don't think that's been brought up yet. But that's just the sort of thing that's happening in a state in our country. And so with total Democrat control, there's a lot of things that could happen if you and I don't rise up. And so I think that really just as a call to action is more than ever, your voice matters with your representatives. You need to make your voice heard. Your voice is going to matter so much if you call up your representative and you say, hey, I want you to vote this way on this bill. I want you to vote for family. I want you to vote for life. I want you to vote for parental rights. Like they need to hear from you.
That reminds me. Yeah. Sorry. Something that we should have mentioned earlier. Now that because we've seen, there's this phrase, when someone tells you who they are, believe them. And we have heard from the incoming DFL majority that one of their top priorities is to codify so-called abortion rights. They want not just Minnesota court jurisprudence, but Minnesota law to reflect their idea that abortion is a constitutionally protected right.
Wow.
So we should expect that in the next legislative session or the one after that, they will try to codify Doe v. Gomez, which is the Minnesota Roe v. Wade, into our law, which will make it that much more difficult to get rid of. We could even see them try to add abortion to the Constitution.
Oh,
we could even see a constitutional amendment. We saw.
Are you saying that on the national level or
no in Minnesota?
Okay, yep. Although on the national level, we should look out for that.
Perhaps indeed,
yeah.
but we in Minnesota, all it would need would be for the Minnesota Senate and the Minnesota House to agree on a measure,
and the governor
doesn't even need to sign it in
he
Minnesota.
Doesn't sign it? Wow.
No, it would go right to the people. So just like we saw in Michigan, Michigan is not a deep blue state by any means, but they just passed a radical pro-abortion constitutional amendment. So we need to be on the lookout, and we need to be able to kill that type of thing before it starts. And that is what we'll be up to. Yep. I mean, that's just one of the things we'll be watching for and working both through lobbying campaigns and the stuff we are doing behind the scenes.
We will send out petitions for you as things come up, petitions where you can sign. We will keep you updated. If there's something really radical coming down the pipe, we will let you know in our weekly emails. So really just make sure to subscribe, mfc.org/subscribe, because you don't want to miss an email. Things are about to get really heated here in Minnesota. And again, we're not despairing. Honestly, the fight is energizing us. We're here for the fight. We're not backing down. We're not running away. We're not like, oh, we've lost here in Minnesota and we're moving to Florida. That is not our attitude. There's actually a lot of room to fight back. And I think that there's a lot of wins in the future ahead of us, both in the near future and further out. There's a lot of wins. We just need to be faithful again.
I completely agree, Grace. That was really good. And so this climate that we're in makes it all the more important for you to tune into the Family Beacon so that you can get the facts and stand for truth. Thank you for joining us this afternoon on the Family Beacon. Again, it's Grace Evans and Moses Bratford from Minnesota Family Council. Have a wonderful weekend.
Thanks for listening to or watching this episode of the Family Beacon podcast from Minnesota Family Council. Subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts so you're up to date on life, family, and religious freedom. You can follow us on Instagram at MN Family Council and subscribe to us on YouTube to watch our content. Get the facts, stand for truth.